Hello, friends. I'm here today with one of my favorite people, Jay Watts. We're going to be talking to him about terminology we use in debating abortion. Some of you may go, wait a minute, that name Jay Watts sounds familiar. Yeah, he worked with us at LTI for a number of years, being one of our top premier speakers. He is a gifted communicator. He now runs a ministry called Merely Human, and he goes out and speaks on life issues. And by the way, if you're a pregnancy center director or a Right to Life organization, Jay is a man you need to be aware of and you need to make use of. He brings a wealth of knowledge along with his gifted communication skills, and I commend him to you wholly. Jay, I'm glad to have you on the show today.
I am thrilled to be here, Scott.
Just by way of introduction, tell people a little bit about yourself and about Merely Human.
Um, Briefly about myself, I would say that one of the things that seems to fascinate people the most about me and my story is that when I was younger, all through college, I was an atheist and on the pro-choice side of things. I then became convinced through reasonable research. I mean, it wasn't an emotional decision, but it led to take Christianity seriously. And then once investigating Christianity after taking it seriously, I ultimately became a Christian. Immediately, the worldview impact of Christianity changed what I knew had to have a change on what I thought about abortion. Right? Going into it as an atheist, I was much closer to nihilism than I was to any belief system. Right? I just did not believe that there was any such thing as objective moral values. I thought there was only power dynamics being acted out, both politically and in communities. And so what happened? So I had a fairly reductive view of what it meant to be a human being. We were just material, and there were no such things as real rights and wrongs. So immediately after becoming a Christian, I mean, immediately the night that I became a Christian, I remember as I was trying to sort through what this dramatic change in how I understood the world meant. One of the first things that occurred to me was that I was wrong about abortion because if we were made if there were an intention in our design or purpose, if there was anything like that, if there were a creator that was interested in our life, then that meant human beings were more than merely human, which ultimately comes to be later on the name of the ministry that I operate. And at that moment, I remember going to God and saying, "Hey, look, God, I think a lot to sort out here. But if you're taking requests now that I've turned my life over to you, I knew I belong to you. You can do whatever you want with me. I understand that this relationship is not where Jay gets to dictate how things happen. But if I could go the rest of my life without ever having to talk to somebody about abortion, that would be great. Because most of my conversations about abortion at that time from the other side had been very heated. I mean, I always say that it
Yeah,
brings out the worst versions of ourselves, oftentimes when we get into this discussion. But obviously, because the moral importance of it just weighs on us. It's more than just the identity that I bring into any conversation over beliefs that I have, which I could make you or anybody else mad just by insulting a movie that you like. But what we're talking about is something that we both have, like that we tend to have strong ideas about. So we have that
right,
identity issue coming into our discussion, but also has incredible moral weight to it that affects
right.
so much of our lives. And that's felt in every conversation. I just wanted nothing to do with it. So
Yeah,
I want to be clear then as I wrap this part of the story up. God did not drag me kicking and screaming into a pro life world. What he did was very patiently, very lovingly, over the course of several years, transition me from somebody who was positionally pro life to someone that started to become convicted of what we were actually talking about. I mean, the level
right.
of destruction that we're talking about. And then ultimately, my inaction in the face of that became felt as almost an oppressive guilt. I mean, in the sense that I was like, how can I both be convinced that the unborn are human, are one of us, a part of our human community? They're being destroyed at the rate that they're being destroyed to the practice of abortion. And yet
Yep.
my response to it has limited to maybe some arguments at the water cooler, right? I may be animated enough in the break room at work sometime to say something. And it was that conviction that led me to reach out to my local pregnancy center, which introduced me to you. The first thing I did in my pregnancy center was plan a banquet where you were coming to speak, and that's how you and I met. Which sort of led me on this path, I believe, guided providentially to being able to live a life where I was able to both to be at peace with that conviction, right? If I have a
Yeah.
conviction and am reasonably convinced of the unborn's humanity, then I have to live a life that reflects that I genuinely believe that. And that's where we got to. Merely Human Ministries, much later on, after I worked as a development coordinator and a speaker at our pregnancy center. And then I worked with you for 8 years, 7 or 8 years at Life Training Institute. Um, I just wanted to, you and I talked about it. I just needed to find my own voice, my own way in communicating. So what Merely Human Ministries just ultimately did was the emphasis is still very strongly on the most pressing and urgent issue when we're talking about life issues. To me, is still
Right.
abortion, because we're talking about something where human lives are actively being destroyed every single day. And with something like 50% of the population of the United States approving of that destruction, which is a wild thing to say. I was once asked at a school, "Why don't you spend your time talking about things like child sex trafficking or things like that? Why does it have to be abortion?" I was like, "Well,
Yeah.
50% of the population in the United States doesn't think child sex trafficking is a good thing that ought to be
Right.
defended. Then we all agree that's
Exactly.
wrong." But a
Right.
significant amount of people in the United States think this is a good thing, and so it has to be fought out at every level that we can possibly fight it. But it also did open
Exactly.
up opportunities for me to expand on the platform that I operate from, on just the idea of loving our neighbors ourselves and how it translates into other areas. Those other areas don't often have or almost never have the same kind of urgency we're talking about with abortion, but then they're still a part of this greater theme. How do we love our neighbors ourselves in a world where we're often pitted against each other and see each other in reductive views?
It's so funny how our stories are so similar. I was that guy who was at least attitudinally pro-life as
Yeah,
far back as I can remember. But I didn't do anything about it till I saw an abortion video that Greg Cunningham played, and it absolutely ripped me to my core. And
yeah,
I fundamentally changed vocation, as did you, to
yep,
do something about this because I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. It's amazing how that is. I'm also amazed at how, when you became converted, you became born again, the Lord immediately set your mind right about abortion. And we live in an age right now of James Tallaricos that run around talking about how full-blown abortion is consistent with a Christian life, and yet the
yeah.
minute you became a Christian, your attitude on abortion changed.
Yeah, and I've talked about Talarico on our own podcast at some point and written a little bit about him. I just think it's fundamentally dishonest to say I believe that every human being has value, was created for a purpose. There's intention and behind it of a creator, and at the same time, though we have the freedom of any human being has the freedom to destroy another human being because we find their presence inconvenient. And
Right.
the reason that he gives obviously he gives some what he believes is biblical support of it. I find him particularly annoying because he's one of those people that says, "Here is why I biblically think that abortion is justified as a Christian, but I'm not an expert on this. I don't
Yeah.
pretend to have thought very deeply about this. I haven't researched it." So on the one hand, he's saying these are good reasons to be a Christian and support abortion. And then when he's obviously offering scripture that has nothing to do with abortion, or these stretchers or tortures to the point where he has to include abortion in it as far as something that's permissive. I think Numbers 5 being one of those where I think it is so often tortured by the other side
Oh,
to
yeah.
mean something that it doesn't mean. It's ridiculous. But then if
Yep.
you push him on, that's not what that means. Well, I just haven't thought about this. Well, then don't talk about it. I mean,
Then don't talk
seriously,
about it.
if
Exactly.
correct. If you haven't bothered to become informed on one of the most morally important issues of our age, then just don't speak publicly about it like you are some sort of moral authority on it. That seems to be a simple request.
This is one of the things I love about you. I remember you saying very distinctly in reference to a LTI staffer coming up through the ranks, a rather young gun, that he didn't need to comment on everything on social media. And it's
Yeah.
okay to stay in your lane where you actually know something and not comment on everything. And I think there's a
Yep.
wisdom point there that you really do a good job communicating there. I want to talk about something that you and I have both been attacked for, and like to get your thoughts on it. I was attacked not long ago online by a preacher, a pastor, who supports equal protection legislation, who tried to ramrod me into saying, well, you don't really believe abortion is evil because you won't call it murder. You publicly make a syllogism. You don't use the word murder. You argue it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being, that abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. But you won't use the word murder. That makes you both unbiblical and not very courageous. And I think we both have tactical reasons why we don't use that word in our case for the pro-life view. Mine happens to be this: I'd rather establish facts than shout conclusions. And
Yeah.
I'm a lazy guy, Jay. I don't want to have to do extra work defending my position. I don't want to have to
Yeah.
defend the claim that abortion is murder. I'd rather make the case that it's wrong and force my opponents to be on the defensive. Talk to us a little bit
Yeah.
about why you don't use the term.
I think one of the reasons is the reason that you just brought up. I would go back to, obviously Greg Kokel's book Tactics, I think, is one of the greatest books ever written
Yeah,
about how to have conversations with people about important issues. And he goes
exactly.
through a series of tactical questions. The first question in there is, what do you mean by that? And I would say
Right.
to any presenter, and you and we have a job to do. When I show up, I have a job, a single job to do. And that's to make a moral case more often than not. It's to make a moral case for the wrongness of abortion. And
Exactly.
so I'm very focused on the job at hand, but I also need to know my audience as best I can because we have to have goals. I have to know who I'm talking to. I kind of have to have some sense of where they are on this issue. And then I have to have a realistic goal about what I hope to accomplish while I'm there. Now, I could just go and pound on the lectern and call everybody murderers and hope that there's some conviction in the audience as a result of the passion of my beliefs that they will change their mind on that. That's not likely to happen. That's not an effective way, in my sense, to communicate. And so that first question that Greg offers is, what do you mean by that? To ask that question. Well, if I apply that even to myself as I'm standing in front of an audience, if I'm trying to figure out if I use the term murder, what do I mean by that? How does the audience receive it? What does that mean for how we're going to be navigating this conversation the whole way through? There's no way to know. I think in terms of simple, like you said, I'm lazy. I think of myself as simple, right? I want to simplify the communication as much as I possibly can. And so
Yeah.
for that reason, I'm very careful about picking terminology. And does a term that I use clarify? Does it confuse? Does it complicate? Those are three things I ask myself anytime that I bring a term into the discussion.
Those are
So if I
very
come,
good points. Repeat
yeah,
them because I want people to hear them again. Those are excellent things to consider.
so whenever I'm introducing any term, any terminology into the discussion, I want to know, does this word or term that I'm bringing in, does it clarify? Are we getting through and cutting through the kind of mess of the discussion and getting to a clarifying point? Because it's vital that we have clear definitions for us to have true disagreements. So if we're
Right.
going to disagree on something, we have to have clear definitions that both sides agree on. And
Right.
is it a confusion? By using it, do I bring in other things that are going to make the whole issue more confusing? Are they going to hear me saying this when I mean one thing, and are they going to take it as something else? Or does it complicate the issue? By using it, do I bring in other issues? And I would say that for me, on when I think about this issue, the use of the term murder, doing the job that I'm doing, which is to morally engage more often than not people who disagree with me and to try to convince them of the rightness of the view that abortion is the unjustified destruction of innocent human life, objectively morally wrong. That by using the term murder, I bring in something that may confuse and certainly complicates. And what I mean by
Yeah.
it may confuse, I'll set that one aside for a second. Let's talk about complicates for a moment. What I mean by complicating is I think that oftentimes when we discuss the issue of abortion, one of the major mistakes that we make is confusing the category of moral and legal. And that those distinctions are not always clear to people on my side, on our side, who are trying to have a reasonable discussion of this. And what may be morally clear to them in a biblical sense, abortion as murder, gets more complicated when you bring in the legal ramifications for using the term murder, right? I mean, just think in
Right.
right now. Now, every talk I give, you and I overlapped last week, I think it was in Michigan, where I came
Yeah,
in
we
right
did.
before you, and then you came
By
in
the
right
way, I
after me.
don't want to have to follow you again because I don't want to be compared to Jay Watts. Go on.
Well, the whole time before I was saying Scott's coming in to talk about some of this stuff, so I won't cover it. I don't want to intrude on what he's going to be talking about. But as we were talking and as I was talking to that group, immediately when I'm talking about, I recognize that intentionally killing or even killing another human being, being one human being causing the death of another human being, is unavoidably homicide. It's just by definition homicide, right? I mean,
Right.
there's only four ways that we can die. We can die by suicide, accidental death, natural death, or homicide. So it's unavoidably homicide when we're talking about human beings killing or causing the death of other human beings. So I don't shy away from killing. I don't shy away from homicide, but I don't introduce the term murder. And I told them, so because we have to keep clear distinctions about what we're talking about. And when you use a term like murder that overlaps into two different categories, it can become complicated because
Yeah.
murder legally is a different thing than the moral justice, the moral qualification of murder. And when we talk about law, we talk about first degree murder, second degree murder, manslaughter.
Right.
You've got felony murder. We've got intentional or accidental homicide. I mean, you have all of these different things that are included in, and those distinctions are important to me to keep them clear. So rather than bringing in a term that bridges both, right, that has moral meaning and legal meaning, particularly when I've seen that people have a difficult time keeping those two categories separate, I just avoid the term for that because I don't like that complication of being added in. And when people bring it up, um, I tend to say, okay, what are we talking about? What do you mean by that? What does murder mean for you? And like you said, that all of a sudden introduces so much more work into the conversation,
Yeah.
just so that I have what I would consider the personal privilege of being able to condemn it as murder so that I make myself feel better about the strength of my language. I don't need that.
Yeah.
I don't need it to make my case.
Yeah, this is something that bothered me when this pastor came after me and said, well, you're not really pro-life the way you think you are because you won't call abortion murder. I asked him to imagine a scenario. You and I are speaking to a hostile audience. I show up, I show images of abortion, I present a syllogism, I defend it with science and philosophy. You follow me and you stand at the podium and you shout the conclusion, abortion is murder. Who actually did the better job of moving the audience? And his answer was, I did because I followed God. That's the best he could give me. And I find that just remarkable.
Well, their sense is, and I've had this conversation with people on the people who disagree with me on this.
Right.
And their sense is that they have a responsibility or duty to bring about conviction in the heart of their audience towards their sin towards God and to orient themselves back into a right relationship with God. There's an evangelizing aspect to what they want to do at that moment, right? And though I talk about the gospel at every chance I get, and though it's never a secret that I'm a Christian, when people bring me in, evangelizing is not my primary goal. It's not my job. That's not what they brought me in to do. I'm not doing an event where it's an evangelizing event. I'm in to discuss it. And what you brought up is interesting as well, because, and where I say the confusion part can come into this as well, other than complication, there's confusion. And what I mean by that is, even though something like 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 women are getting abortions during the course of their lifetime, so that means something like 75 to 80% of women are not, which is an encouraging thing. It ought to be an encouraging thing to us that even though people support it, they're not all getting them, even though they support it. But you know somebody that has, more likely than not, and more likely than not, you love someone that has.
Yeah.
And so if I've got an audience in front of me, and I'm going to make a strong case for the objective wrong, the objective evil of the practice of abortion, but I add to that the element that I need you to accept in the course of this 30, 45-minute talk and whatever Q&A that I have, that your mom, your sister, your friend that you helped get an abortion is not only objectively morally wrong in what they did, but they're a murderer.
Right.
That's a heavy load to introduce.
Not going to help you persuade at all. Hey, Jay, we got to take a short break. When we come back, I want to ask you about the relationship between gospel and pro-life advocacy, because another thing that you and I have heard many times is that we'll only end abortion by preaching the gospel. You and I both use the gospel in every pro-life talk we give, even to secular audiences, but how we view the role of the gospel is different than many would who have attacked us for the way we approach that question. I'll take that up when we come back from the break. Hello, friends. You may not have time to read a full-length treatment of abortion like I've done in this book, The Case for Life, the second edition, but you may have time to take what amounts to 7 sessions, a week's worth of study if you want to do it day by day, to learn how to defend your pro-life views persuasively. We have a basic course that will help you do just that. You will learn how to make a formal case for the pro-life position. You will learn how to defend it with science and philosophy. Even with non-Christians, you can make a case for the pro-life view. Then we'll teach you how to handle objections, how to recognize the 5 bad ways people argue about abortion, and how they often bring up things that are beside the point. You'll learn to keep the main thing, so that you're in charge instead of feeling like you're in the hot seat whenever the issue of abortion comes up. Visit the website for details. Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Jay Watts. And Jay, just before the break, I teased you with a question about the relationship between gospel and pro-life advocacy. Some of our critics say, who are on our side, that unless we lead with the gospel, number one, we can't change hearts, because their argument is that those who are unregenerate can't recognize morality. Then their second argument is that we have to convert the culture and in an evangelistic sense before we can convert them on abortion. I'd love to hear your thoughts on those.
I think, first of all, I mentioned earlier, I'm a simple guy. I think that when you have a job to do, you need to understand what we've talked about before. I need to understand the needs of my audience. I need to understand my goal with any particular audience that I'm outreaching to, and whatever form that outreach takes. And then I need to have a reasonable expectation of how I'm going to reach that. I think that passion is great. I think that a lot of times people mistake passion for effective communication, and they go in and they're just extremely passionate, but they're not actually accomplishing what they want to accomplish. And
Right.
so when you go and talk to an audience, I have a goal. Just last week, I was talking to a young person in Michigan, where you and I both were, and she was talking about what I was saying, that I'm not as particularly concerned with the emotional responses of the people I'm talking to, because I expect my message to be upsetting. No matter how I can deliver, no matter how much I try to deliver this message in as nice and inoffensive way as I possibly can, I am going to offend by bringing the
Right.
message that abortion is a great moral evil. And especially when we have the ability to use images or something. There's the intent is to prick the heart. The intent is to get them motivated, to shake them up, put a stone in their shoe. However you want to talk about it, we're trying to disrupt them out of the patterns of seeing the world in which they operate, and introduce them into a new way to think about it. And there's no way to do that without being offensive to them and to how it's going to be received. And so one of the things that I told that young lady, because she said, well, when I offend them or when they get upset, I see that as an opportunity to minister to them in some sense of a pastoral care, she was saying. And I said, okay, well, that's great. But now you're doing another job. Right? My job is to communicate the truth on the issue of abortion as cleanly and as clearly as I possibly can, for the effect of moving them from one position to another, or at least opening them up to the idea that this position is reasonable and that they might not be as settled where they thought they were. Sometimes my job is to interact with people who are going to be completely unmovable on this, but in front of an audience of people who may be movable audience, and so that I can just at that point show how in the engagement that side is lacking, that side does not have the ability to be able to explain the human experience, particularly the existence of equal human dignity. So
At that
in
point, you're
essence,
being very prudent in recognizing who your customer was. It's not
yeah,
that stubborn pro-abortionist, it's the audience watching the exchange. This leads me
right.
to something else that I think we need to address. You and I have both heard Christians say that unless people are born again, they can't recognize right and wrong. Speak to the idea that atheists are incapable of recognizing right and wrong.
Yeah, Tina Whittington at Students for Life America was watching me one time, and she came up and said, the discussion of abortion is like a gateway drug to the gospel. And,
Yeah,
and what it means is what
that's one
ultimately
way to
led me
phrase
to
it.
yeah, I think it's a great way to think about it, because I've
Yeah,
seen this. What happens is I go and talk to audiences, and you and I have both had this experience. Let's say we go into a school a largely secular audience is sitting in front of us as students. We talk for 45 minutes about abortion, then maybe an hour Q&A or whatever we're allowed to do. And when it's over, the principal or teacher or somebody brings students to us after and says, do you have time to continue this conversation with these students? These students are some of the more difficult, some of the smarter but more difficult students we have on particular
Right.
issues. And almost all the time, what the students want to talk about is not abortion, but God.
Yeah.
And what
I've seen
happened
that.
is, yeah, and what happened was because we represented this view in a way that was respectful, rational, reasonable, they become curious about the communicator. And because we're honest and clear when we're up there, I am here as a Christian. I am first and foremost a Christian. It may not be the means by which I argue or the manner in which I argue. I may not be appealing to scripture, but don't be deceived about anything. The guy standing in front of you is
Right.
fully and completely devoted to Christ. Since they know that about me, but they've heard me argue in a way that is respectful and reasonable to them, which oftentimes they'll tell me. I found that shocking. Right? I was not
Right.
expecting this kind of a conversation.
Oh,
This has
I've
now
had this
opened them
happen
up
all the time. Yeah, all the
all the
time
time.
people lead into this. Jay, we got about a minute left. I want to give
Oh,
you a
okay.
chance to tell people how to reach you and tell us a little bit about what you got coming up, whatever you want to conclude with.
Nearlyhumanministries.org is the website. You can go to equip.org where at a Christian Research Journal, they have given me a column. So I'm doing a column called Ethical Apologetics, where I talk about
Good.
different things. I've got an article coming up about Reinhold Niebuhr. I've talked a little bit about AI. I've talked about Yuval Noah Harari. So they just basically said we would like some framework of understanding some of the things that we're seeing in the world through the lens of both a Christian worldview and someone with an eye towards how we treat other human beings.
That's just fantastic. By the way, for my listening audience, Jay Watts was one of the reviewers of the second edition of The Case for Life. I sent it to him on purpose, knowing I'd have a very shrewd set of eyes looking at the manuscript. And if you give me credit for that book, at least in passing, give Jay a salute because he was one of those that helped me refine it. And I'm very grateful for that. Merely Human Ministries, folks. Make sure you go there. And again, I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning of the show. If you're a pregnancy resource center director and you're looking for a guy who not only tells a great story about his own personal testimony, but has a very solid grasp on the morality of abortion or how pro-lifers should engage the immorality of abortion more accurately, Jay is your guy. He does a great job with fundraising for these centers. And if you're a Right to Life group wanting to do campus outreach, I again commend Jay to your working because he will do a fantastic job for you. All right, folks, we're out of time for this episode. Thanks for joining us. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Case for Life.